The Secret History of the House of Tepekixko. 1. The Coming of the Gods and the War of Earth and Heaven. In the time before death, when the Creator stood alone upon the world he had breathed into life, he felt keenly his solitude, and the burdens of his long labor weighed heavy on him. It is said that he had forged the sun, and molded the globe from soft clay to harden in its warmth. And yet the barren swaths about him left him dull and dreary. Thus he sought to bring about aid to soothe the completion of his task, and for the first time he tried his hand at making something more lively and able than the soft clay and roaring heat which had so far occupied him. In the first month of the solar year, he brought his first and eldest daughter, Laut, into the world. With her came water, and the seas rolled in to fill the low pockets in the clay, and the rains and snows fell for the first time upon the wastes which had baked beneath the sun, and their depths filled with all the wholesome beasts of the currents and tides. She was heavy with the songs of the sea wind, and fast to anger, but just as fast to laugh. Laut was crowned goddess of the sea, and of sea-born storms, and of love, and with her coming, the Creator had brought hands to help him in his craft. The Creator named the first month Teoat, ocean, in her honor. In the second month of the solar year, he brought his first and eldest son, the Xoloxaitian, into the world. With him he brought the breeze, and eyes keen enough to see every crevice and know every nook of both sea and land. He was jolly and wise, even in youth, and yet riven with a wanderlust and hunger for knowledge which left him restless and without sleep. The Xoloxaitian was crowned god of discovery, exploration, curiosity, and the wind. With his presence, the Creator and Laut knew all that transpired in their growing realm, and took solace in his watch. The Creator named the second month Neshtia, discovery, in his honor. In the third month of the solar year, the Creator brought his second son into the world. This was Lewodreth, and like many second sons, he was hard to command from the beginning. Lewodreth brought change and chance and the unpredictable flux of season and weather with him, and though he wrought destruction, he always breathed new life into the land or sea ridden rough by his passing. The first trees were his doing, and their leaves began in time to turn clay to soil, which their roots preferred. Lewodreth made beasts and birds to fill them, that he might make better poetry in their company. He sang and danced even more skillfully than his sister Laut did, but he wandered almost as much as keen Xoloxaitian, and had a temper to shame both, though his lack of focus kept him from readily employing it. Lewodreth was crowned god of change, rebellion, unbridled freedom, and all growing things. Through him, the Creator found new love for the world he was forging, for now even he knew not the ends of its design. The Creator named the third month Maquishtia, freedom, in his honor. In the fourth month of the solar year, Kandarag, the second daughter, was made. She brought with her the soft glow of the moon, by which to navigate the nights she held so dear. The tides were awakened, and night flowers bloomed, and grass began to grow in the open places where Lewodreth's trees did not cast shade. But also she brought storms, as Laut had, and this time to land, where they ravaged the plains and scarred the wildlife. Kandarag led the first hunts, and birthed the first hunting beasts, and took thrill in the culling of the game of the wilds in the dead of moonlit nights, which her careless brother Lewodreth had left to run rampant and unchecked. Laughter was free with her, but there was a cruelty there which her sister Laut had never showed. To run and to ride was her greatest pleasure, but unlike the Xoloxaitian, she moved to kill, not to learn. Thus was Kandarag crowned goddess of the hunt, pursuit, ambush, the night, and the moon. The Creator named the 4th month Metzli, moon, in her honor. In the 5th month of the solar year, Aionios, the 3rd sun, was made. He thundered into the world, and roared with his first breath, and stomped the ground to test his strength. Thus were tossed up the mountains of the world, and the clouds were set about them by the steam of his call. All the raw strength and physical bravery of the Creator had been invested in him, and Aionios at once began contests of strength among his peers, who would humor him, or challenged himself to climb higher peaks or lift heavier stones. He basked in the midst of the mountain mists, to cool himself after long nights spent testing the might of his arms. And yet in him dwelt a loyalty which knew no bounds, and if ever his siblings were in need, brave Aionios was the first to answer their pleas. Aionios was crowned the god of strength, bravery, contest, and above all, loyalty. The Creator named the 5th month Nehueliol, loyalty, in his honor. Then, in the 6th month of the solar year, our own Lord and Maker, the old general, Haray himself, took shape as the 4th and final true sun. His salute to his Maker and his siblings was accompanied by a red-hot wind from beneath his feet, for Haray is a being of hard-bound fury which only magma can match. The sheer heat of him made his brothers and sisters nervous, and it hardened to stone the clay of much of the newborn world. Volcanoes rose along his path, and in the light of day he retired to the world's core to slumber, that he need not suffer both his own warmth and the sun's. Here he made metal from the ores that formed about him, and with it forged the first weapons beneath the searing flame of his own eyes. His temper was terrible, but such was the iron discipline of Haray that he never showed it save in need of violence, and in those days there was no need. But the Creator knew there were other things beyond himself and his creations, and to that end he needed his sword arm strong. Thus, Haray was crowned god of discipline, command, stone, metalworking, and war, and made defender of the nascent world. The Creator named the 6th month Yaoyot, war, in his honor. These 6 came to be known as the first brood, and though Haray quarreled with Luodreth, and Laut quarreled with Kandarag, and the Aldakan quarreled with Aionios, these were but the spats of siblings, and in the end, all served with fealty under the Creator, and all worked in harmony to manage and protect all that which they had made. And, for a brief time, all was good. Haray came to be the captain among his peers, and as the exhausted Creator took less and less direct part in each creation, Haray was left to inspire and direct the other gods of the first brood alone. It was during this time that many of the bonds that have shaped our history were forged. Kandarag led Haray on her hunts, and in turn, Haray taught Kandarag to better wield the weapons of slaughter. In time, they came to be lovers, and swore oaths of binding each upon the blood of the other. Aionios found in Haray nearly the match for his own unbridled strength, and they climbed many heights, and dived many caverns together when the world was young. At length, Aionios swore the great sword Haray had forged him to the service of his youngest brother. Thus did loyal Aionios become the first legionary, and, in so doing, forge the unbreakable bond which will forever hold the children of Haray in union with the children of Aionios. The Aldakan and his errant brother Luodreth found comfort in wandering the open spaces and dark forests of the world, and took great pleasure in upturning every stone, and tracing the route of every canyon and valley to the sea. Luodreth composed the poetry and song to describe them, and the Aldakan catalogued them for the future, that they not be forgotten. Only Laut seemed aimless, for though she had her sea and her song, the goddess of love had yet no one to share it with the Creator keeping to himself more and more as time wore on, and her siblings wrapped up in their own endeavors. Laut knew not what to do with herself. It was Laut who, in those dark days, convened her kin of the first brood to approach the Creator for yet more siblings. The Creator was exhausted and sought rest, but at length the pleading of his first daughter moved him, and he rose to take to his craft once more. But now he gathered his first brood about him, and asked them all to aid in his task, that it not prove so devastating to him. Whether years had passed in the interim, or whether many years had been lived in the space of weeks is not told, as the march of days was strange in the youth of the world, and the gods are beyond it in all but name. But it is held that, in the 7th month of the solar year, Xorgu, the 5th son and firstborn of the corrupted second brood, was made. He was given the sun as his dominion by the Creator, and brought to it the power to feed and soothe the plants and waters of the young world. In those early times he was a thing of teeth and temper, but Laut fast tamed him, for it is known she had helped form him to fill the void in her heart, and the two were inseparable from the dawn. With her aid, he planted the first gardens and sowed the first fields and meadows along the coast, where Laut watered them with the rains of her storms. Xorgu was crowned god of the sun, hearth, protection of home, and fertility. The Creator named the 7th month Chantli, home, in his honor. In the 8th month of the solar year, the 3rd daughter, Akamatak, was made. It is said that even then, before the gods held favored forms, Akamatak went about many-limbed, many-eyed, and many-mouthed, the better to flee and weave secrets. She discovered all there was to know about the plants and organs and rare flowers of the young world, and made of them poisons and tonics, which she slipped to some among the beasts, that they might test them for her with bite and sting. Akamatak was retiring, and more so even than Harakwe, she hid in the day, for the light burned her. She preferred the dark, where stealth and concealment were natural, and her siblings would go long ages without seeing her, though Akamatak always watched, and wove visions in the dreams of her siblings when they slumbered. Akamatak was named goddess of alchemy, slumber, visions, darkness, and secrets. The Creator named the 8th month Tokat, spider, in her honor. In the 9th month of the solar year was made Zhezhongzhe, the 6th son. Regal of bearing and noble of purpose, Zhezhongzhe was imperious, and despite his youth, sought station and prominence among his kin at all costs. It was Zhezhongzhe that, in coordination with Xorgu's fields, laid the first stone and timber of the first cities, though they were then just sculpture and storage to him. Zhezhongzhe made paint from the concoctions of Akamatak, and laid to the first canvases images of the newborn world, though ever he sought to perfect what he saw, and reform the crests of hills and the canopies of trees to better serve his image. From this paint developed ink, and with it, Zhezhongzhe laid the first codified letters, for until then his siblings fond of memory, like the Aldakan, had made and understood their own on whim, but could not share them each to each. Thus, Zhezhongzhe was crowned the god of architecture, art, literacy, hierarchy, and learning. The Creator named the 9th month Amoshua, scholar, in his honor. In the 10th month of the solar year, Ra'ath-Ka, the 4th daughter, was made. Aloof and dangerous, it was fast witnessed that Ra'ath-Ka had a penchant for the slow killing of beasts, and even Kandarag was taken aback during hunts with her sister, But with this cruelty came a detached wisdom and observant keenness which made for fine advice, and level-headed action in times of upset. She exulted in the pain of others, and yet from it wove somber songs, and carved out a space beyond time for the departed reflections of slain beasts to dwell, the first godly afterlife, of which she was shepherd. Her passage carved rivers and lakes and mires, in which she loved to soak and bask, and ever one of her siblings could seek her there for counsel in times of confusion. Ra'ath-Ka was crowned goddess of cruelty, death, wisdom, fresh and unsalted water, and balance. The Creator named the 10th month Atoyat, river, in her honor. In the 11th month of the solar year, Korotvazhny, the 7th sun, was made. Ice froze along the northern seas at his coming, and the chill of winters not yet fallen were suddenly present in the bones of all his siblings. Cold and distant of heart, Korotvazhny was nonetheless brave, and nearly a match for Ionios in strength of arm. But where Ionios held competition and feats to be things of bonding and brotherhood, Korotvazhny thought only of the practical, of conquest and will and the iron rule of the strongest survivor. He clung to the meanest climbs of mountain and steppe, where the weather was harshest and the game was scarcest. He found his pleasure in the pursuit of struggle and hardship above all things, that he might prove himself the mightiest of either brood. Korotvazhny was crowned god of struggle, survival, resourcefulness, and the cold. The Creator named the 11th month Kekwispan, winter's approach, in his honor. Then, in the 12th and final month of the solar calendar, Kramak, the 8th sun, traitor of traitors, last and most terrible of the corrupted second brood, was made. He came into the world with bloody maw, and fought with all he could, sibling, beast, or father. Kramak was a creature of excess, and ate only in orgiastic feasts, and brewed the first alcohol from the provender of Gazurgu's fields. He was never without song on his lips, but his were shouted, and only worthy of reciting a great deed done, or a great deed in the coming. He disdained the discipline of Haray, and the restrained hierarchy of Zhuizhangzhe, for he believed in a life lived wild and to its fullest extent, even, or especially, if that meant danger cut it short. Risk and attention and glory were his province, and Kramak took wing and flew above to paint the sky its myriad colors, that all might know him and his deeds, and hear him on the air as he sang in the dawn or dusk. Thus, Kramak was crowned the god of song, excess, sensation, anger, glory, in the open sky. The Creator named the 12th month Kwikat, song, in his honor. Kramak fast became the leader of his brood, much as Haray had become the captain of his own. Despite his brashness, the magnetism and charisma of the chaotic sky god was undeniable. Ra'ath-Ka he took as his courtesan, and as the divines all continued to carve out their places upon the world, Kramak began to hunt among them, taking what they made for sport and fighting over what spoils there were to be found. Most of the second brood was with him in this, for they admired Kramak and feared his wrath. Of the first brood, only Laut was spared their predations, for her lover Gazurgu intervened on her behalf, and kept Kramak and his own broodmates from her shores. But the first gods fought back against the upstarts, and many a campaign was waged between the camps, with blood being shed and grudges being accrued by all. It is perhaps because of the Creator's decline that the second brood became so vile, for as they descended the count of months towards Kramak, they became more and more repulsive to the sensibilities of the first. The Creator, in early days, would have put an end to the raging of the second brood. After all, He had started this process to bring harmonious, if violent, order to the world, and the pillars of creation fighting so frequently among themselves did not make for a sturdy structure. But to the dismay of the first brood, who had known the Creator in his prime, he seemed broken and drained by his labors after the last of the dozen was made whole. The Creator was sluggish, distant, half-sleeping and slow to rouse for celebration or worry. Care seemed far from him, and on those rare occasions when he was wakened, he was confused as to his place and position, and often lashed out in fear at those about him. And even in his decay, the Creator was powerful, such that these lashings dealt great wounds, and left his children hesitant to speak with him. This period came to be known as the tyranny of the Creator, not a tyranny of law, but rather one of absence. Some, like Lewodreth, thrived at first in this anarchic chaos, for they loved freedom and the lack of bounds. But the accursed second brood made gluttonous use of this freedom, and before long, without the Creator to curb their rampant desires, Zhezongzhe had cut many of Lewodreth's forests, and Ra'ath-Ka had killed and devoured much of Kandarog's prey, and Akamatak had stolen many of the ores for alchemical experimentation which were bound for use in Harakwe's forges. Harakwe tried to marshal his siblings of the first brood and train them for war, but they were not easily given to discipline, and were hard to keep focused for long. He and stalwart Ionios could only do so much, and there were too many of the second brood for the two to contain alone. What happened next is not remembered the same by all amongst the loyal children of the first brood, but the thread of similarity runs through the tales of all their descendants, Xoloxaitian, Minoan, Volvin, Sion, and Kandari alike. It is said that, after a long period of unrest, Laut and Gizurgu finally fell prey to the raids of Kramak and the others of the second brood. Gizurgu was badly beaten despite his pleas to his broodmates after a desperate bid to fight them off, and in the end, Laut, also overcome by the numbers of the enemy, was left stripped and outraged on the banks of her own ocean, the pearls she used to bind the things of the sea having been stolen from her neck. Harakwe and the others of the first brood cared nothing for Gizurgu, but to see their first and eldest sister, fallen to treachery as she was, so deeply humiliated, enraged them. At the urging of Kandarog, the Aldakan, Lewodreth, and Ionios followed Harakwe as he set out to speak with the Creator. Harakwe meant to tell the Maker that he would kill Kramak and undo the chaos which had been set upon the nascent world before it could take root and fester. When Harakwe came into the company of the Creator with his first brood kin at his side, their father was still in his torpor, and was, as ever, slow to rouse. But when at last the Creator came into consciousness, Harakwe had not finished explaining their coming before he was struck low unawares by a blow from the Creator's hand. For the Creator knew not who or where he was, and took his son to be an attacker or lurker from beyond the world. Even delirious and rent by the exhaustion of his craft, the addled Creator was a thing of raw might unparalleled, and Harakwe was left for a moment winded and dazed upon the ground. The Creator reared up and loomed over them, and lifted his foot to crush the life from his prone fourth son. His lover Kandarog, acting on reflexive impulse after long ages fighting Kramak and the second brood at the warhound's side, struck out in Harakwe's defense with her spear. It planted itself in the stomach of the Creator, and his howl was that of a raging beast, and rent the single continent that occupied the newborn world into many pieces. Tremors rocked the land, and when the children of the first brood before them took their feet, their Maker was wholly not himself, cast, it is said, into times far remote, when he had stood upon his own fields of war, and slain other things of his kind. He knew not his children, and lashed out at them all, and could not be contained by speech or by force of arm. And so a battle ensued which reshaped the mountains and forests and waters the gods had built. Haray led the combat with Makwahwit in hand, and shielded his siblings from harm with all the graceful art his tireless drills had lent him. Kandarag moved like lightning, and struck with shining spear-tip for eyes and the sinew of limbs whenever the wild creator's primal blows swept wide. The Aldakan rent the skin of his maker with arrow and bolt from afar, and never missed his mark. Lewodreth swept legs with his club, and bruised godly flesh with the desperate fervor of a poet driven to madness. And brave Ionios hewed hands and opened gashes with his sword, made keen by his favorite brother, and wielded by a steely hand which made stone seem brittle. But with all this might, the battle still raged for days, and many of the first brood who fought it took grievous injury at the lunatic hands of their exhausted maker. The second brood, Cromac among them, could not ignore the thunder of the battle, and gathered to watch in the distance, that they might see who proved the stronger. Only the traitors of both broods, Laut and her lover Gazorgu, fled the clamor, and wept at what had become of their kin. On the seventh dawn, battered and tired to his bones, the perfect form and boundless endurance of the warhound prevailed, and Haray tore the throat from his maker with the foremost teeth of his Makwahwit, and hewed the head from the shoulders of the Creator as he fell. With the Creator's corpse among them, bloody and bruised and shaken to their very cores with the enormity of what had just occurred, Haray turned to observe his kin. Here was Ionios, so winded he could not stand. The all-seeing Aldakan, for once leaden and slow, at a loss for words. There Lewodreth, hobbled of leg and struggling to rejoin his comrades on the field of victory. And above all Kandarag, torn and ragged and with many shattered teeth, head hung in weary uncertainty. Shame was in them all, for as much as they had acted in defense, they had known their maker was unstable. Yet Haray took the blame on his own shoulders for their approach, and exalted his first brood for their valor in arms. He saluted the Creator, and called forth Ionios to help bear his body to his final rest. The Aldakan volunteered a mountain peak he knew, so tall that the world the Creator had breathed life into looked small from on high, where he might be laid to rest with honors. And so the band of victors laid their plans. But Cromac and his accursed still looked on, and chose this moment to approach. Skulking in came Akamatak, Ra'ath Ka, and Korotvajni, with a laughing Cromac at their head. In their wake followed Zhezongzhe, hesitant at what he knew must now occur, but too eager for the power it would yield to speak or stand against it. Cromac applauded the valor of the first brood, and indeed he seemed truly to respect the grit they had shown. But he now offered his own proposition, one it became clear he would not haggle over. A burial was waste, so Cromac said, for the very flesh and bones of their maker lay before them, replete with what power remained in the exhausted being after all his labors. They should devour him, and draw from the corpse of the Creator all the forces which had dwelt once in him. Not enough for him or his second brood was the power of the divines as they were. He wanted more, and he meant to take it. But Haray, wounded and overstretched as he was, would not back down before his fearsome youngest brother, and drew again his Makwahwit, and told Cromac that if he wished to feast, he would need to bleed for the chance. And so too did Ionios and Kandarag and Lewodreth and the Aldakan stand, for to see the beaten Haray defiant breathed new life into them. Thus began the war of earth and heaven, the struggle between the god of the stone and the god of the sky, and again the newborn world was rocked, and again the lands were reshaped beneath its fury. Again a week passed, and on the 7th day a victor became evident, for throughout the preceding night, Luodreth had fallen unconscious at the hands of Xoloxaitian, and the Aldakan had finally been caught by Akamatak, who had ensnared and poisoned him into a state of paralyzed agony. Ra'ath Ka choked Kandarag into blackness, and even brave Ionios fell prone beneath the flail of Korotvajny. The first brood's wounds and exhaustion from their original struggle had proven too great, and despite their valor, the second brood won out by observing their weaknesses as they grew, and exploiting them when the time came to do so. All that remained that daybreak was Haray, and his arms shook with the agony of his efforts, and his legs trembled beneath the force of the blows he halted from Cromach's hammer. When at last he collapsed, his foe looming over him, Haray awaited the falling strike meant to finish him. He gathered his breath and his strength, and focused the last of his energy into an upward bound, and hewed the laughing, triumphant Cromach's hammerhand from his wrist as the blow fell. But despite Cromach's roars, despite his humiliation and his injury and his agony, Haray was finished, and he knew it. Though battered, all the kin of the second brood stood around him, and Cromach, himself close to exhaustion, was given new life by the rage which flowed through him. Cromach lifted Haray and shattered his spine upon the corpse of their maker. Then he plucked from the skull of the warhound an eye, for to a being of sensation and rapture like Cromach, the deadening of the senses seemed to hell worse than death. He then had Akamatak bind all the fallen in webs, that they might be kept for sport and servitude. Finally, their wounds still open and their fangs moist with anticipation, Cromach, Ra'ath Ka, Akamatak, Korotvajny, and Xoloxaitian fell to their feast, and devoured the Creator's remains as the others lay prone and broken beneath them. Thus ended the war of earth and heaven, and thus began our long bondage beneath the wings of slinking, honorless Cromach.